Welcome, everyone, to episode 138 of Puppet Masters and Castle Freaks, the internet's leading all things Charles Band podcast. I am one of your hosts, Chubby Cheeks, Jared Hornbeck. I'm coming to you from Wonderama Stop and Shop here in Brooklyn, New York. And you know what? It's hard to live in a city like New York and not feel like a small turd in a really big toilet.
That must be hard.
It is hard, but I am not the only one who is ready to talk about this full moon favorite. No, who else is here with me?
Well, it's me, little country con man, Steve Guntley, and this is the podcast about unnaturally long tongues, unnaturally short legs, and of course, unnaturally huge heads. That's because this is the podcast about Head of the Family, one of the indisputable Mount Rushmore movies of the full moon canon. And I'm not just saying that because his head is big enough to be a Mount Rushmore figure. This is a big deal in the full moon universe and a personal favorite, I know, of mine, and I think of yours as well.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely a big movie, and we had to kick off our special promotion, our special month-long theme of Noirvember by talking about Head of the Family. Now, I'm not going to spoil exactly what movies that we're talking about this month, but some of you may know that Full Moon has been launching like a noir program recently where they're just kind of re-releasing some of their older movies in black and white. Most of the films that they choose, like this upgrade, is aesthetic only. I think Head of the Family is the closest Full Moon ever got to making a proper film noir. Like even closer than like Trancers, which is like steeped in like these detective sort of tropes and things like that. I think Head of the Family is like a full-on bizarro neo-noir, and that's kind of why I love about it. I think it's a perfect one to kick off this month.
Bizarre noir is correct, and
Bizarre noir.
You know, it's you're getting a little ahead of us, Steve. It is first of all, if you're listening,
getting
to
a
this
big
on
head.
The day of, you're getting a really big ahead of us. If you're listening to this on the day that it releases, happy Halloween, everyone.
Ooh.
Yeah, so we are officially, I don't know. I mean, I was going to say this is the end of spooky season. I don't really know that I find that to be true. I think you can continue to watch and, consume any kind of horror content that you want really through any time of year. But
Yeah,
October 31st is the culmination of this. And that is when you're hearing this, if you are listening on the day of its release. And we thought this would be just such a fun one to do on Halloween and to have it release on this, not only, like Steve said, to kind of unofficially kick off our Noirvember month, but also because there is a very fun, especially in black and white, kind of Tim Burton-esque feeling to this film. And so it has even though it is not really a horror movie proper in a lot of ways, it shares a lot of elements with Tim Burton movies.
Mhm.
It shares a lot of elements with 1950s sci-fi, large monster movies. It also shares a lot of elements with EC Comics, specifically Jack Kirby stuff that we'll get into.
Yes.
So we are sans a guest on this episode because frankly, I didn't think we really needed it. And I know, Steve, you sort of agreed that we both have a lot of admiration for this movie. So just the two of us kind of coming together, we could do an episode on this. We didn't need to have some super horror related guest to come on and talk about Head of the Family. I didn't think we needed it for this one.
Kind of locked and loaded on this one, and there's also a bit of pressure because this is kind of one of the last like really big name full moon movies that we cover. I mean, at least in terms of the ones that have kind of been established and discovered. I'm not eliminating the possibility that we're going to find a real gem still going, but this is a big one, and a lot of pressure on finding the right guest for that. A lot of people who would like probably be vying to talk about it. And rather than disappoint like several guests, we'll just disappoint all of them. Yeah, we'll let we always leave our guests disappointed. That's our motto here.
Yeah, the disappointment of the many outweighs the disappointment of the few.
Absolutely.
As far as this podcast is concerned. So we apologize wholeheartedly to all the listeners who have to put up with just Steve and myself for this monumental episode. But the reason I kind of stopped myself and drew back a little bit there was because I started getting into some specifics of this episode. So Steve, why don't you fire off some stats before we really start talking about, where the inspiration for this movie comes from, and how much we love this weird little movie.
Absolutely. So, Head of the Family was released November 29th, 1996. It's directed by Charles Band, billing himself as Robert Talbot here. And it's written by Band and Benjamin Carr, who, okay, I think we need to settle this because I've had some disputes. Is Benjamin Carr a pseudonym for somebody, or is it an actual person? Because I've seen the IMDb has this billed as Neil Marshall Stevens. I've also seen Benjamin Carr used for Dominic Muir. And so I think we had some confusion about that. But while we were looking that up, I will say that this movie stars Blake Adams, Jacqueline Lavelle, Bob Schott, Alexandria Quinn, James Jones, Gordon Jemison Noyce, Vicky Skinner, and of course, J.W. Para as Myron. So I don't know when you discovered this movie. I came to it the way I think a lot of people came to it, because I am an avid listener of the Flophouse podcast and have been for years. Friend of the show, Stuart Wellington, co-host of the Flophouse. He's been on before to talk about Castle Freak. He has 3 movies that are kind of in his rotation as like sort of half joke recommendations. They do a recommendation section at the end of that show. And to irritate his co-hosts, I think at first he started breaking out the usual 3. He was always recommending Castle Freak, The Invisible Maniac, which is that an Adam Rifkin movie?
Yes.
Or yeah, very strange movie, and Head of the Family. And so I'm like, they're talking about this so much, and I'm like, I felt like it was kind of an ironic pull to get all of these things, and I don't think it's ironic at all. Like, now that I've seen them, I think it's like these are genuine recommends. But I sought it out, and this was kind of my breakthrough into the full moon universe proper, after like years of like observing full moon movies, of like kind of being curious about them, but never really taking I think I'd seen maybe the first Puppet Master at that point, but other than that, this might be my first full moon movie, and it really sets a tempo that I'm not sure the other movies necessarily meet, because this is such a oddball like swing. In a way, it really typifies like what the best of the Kushner Locke era, which we've, I think, both come to really appreciate, because that is the real like throwing shit to the wall and seeing what sticks era of Full Moon. And man, does this one stick. It is so strange. I've seen this more than any other Full Moon movie. I used to break it out whenever we would have. I used to build them as bad movie nights, but like after like 5 or 6 viewings of this movie, I no longer think it's a bad movie. I think it's a phenomenal movie. But it was always like it always kind of brought the house down every time we brought it out. When did you discover this one?
So I came to this. So first thing I want to do is just say that Neil Marshall Stevens is the real name. And
Okay.
Benjamin Carr is the pen name.
Got it. Okay.
So
I think I get the pen names confused all the time.
Yeah. So Benjamin Carr being one that we've seen used on a lot of projects. Funny to me that this is a Robert Talbot directorial one from Charles Band, because I would speculate that maybe it had to do with like really, making a movie that he personally dug, but not really knowing its kind of universal appeal, and not knowing, well, how audiences would take this film. I feel like it was almost like just precautionary, like, let me not put my name on this in case people really hate this movie or something, because like you said, they're taking some wild swings on this one,
and it could be like VGA rules or something like that. I don't know if he's a guild member or not, but like I think there are certain limits on how many credits you can have in a year or something. Totally like true. Yeah,
that is valid. That might be the reason why, like I said, I was just speculating the other one, because really, to hear Charles Band talk about this one, he has a lot of admiration for it, and I think he holds it up as if maybe if not his favorite, among the very, very short list of favorites that he's done. I didn't come into this movie initially right away at the time of its release or anything like that. Where I found this movie was I made a new friend maybe sometime around 2008 2009. And he and I had very similar tastes in a lot of things, and one of those was in horror movies. And I, like you at the time, had seen a lot of the Empire and Urban Classic stuff on Up All Night, or saw the first Puppet Master, or maybe even up to Puppet Master 3 by that point, and a handful of other full moon movies, but I was not as easily identifiable brand recognition fan the
Hmm.
way I might have been with like Trauma. Like if you had said like there's a new Trauma movie, my frame of reference would have been, okay, well, we're in what, the early 2000s now. So we're talking Poultrygeist and we're talking Citizen Toxie and we're talking like Terra Firma and crazy shit that was coming out at that time. If you said Full Moon Features to me at that point, I didn't have, I would have to kind of piece together who Charles Band was, where he was comparatively with your Lloyd's Kaufman and your Rogers Corman
Hmm.
and those guys. And then it was like, oh, and I remember because the his filmography is quite varied. Oh, not only is it the Puppet Master, but it's some of these other things I've seen the DVD or video covers for. Oh, it's also these Up All Night movies. It's also the Urban Classics and Sorority Babes and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So my one friend was talking, we were having a conversation. He brought up Charles Band, and it was like, oh yeah, the Puppet Master guy. And somehow we got on the conversation of Head of the Family. And so sometime around 2010, I'm gonna say, I saw Head of the Family for the first time on DVD, I believe.
Hmm.
And I was immediately struck by how intentionally funny it is.
It's
Like
very funny.
that was the thing. I was watching it and being like, "Oh, this really works." Like this isn't a movie that was someone was trying to make a monster movie sincerely and everything is so weird and stagey and talky and it just doesn't work, but you can laugh at it. Like I was laughing with the movie and I just really appreciated the huge swings that the movie took.
Yeah,
So
I
then it
think
kind of became,
they fully made the movie they wanted to make that just may not have been at the budget they wanted to make it at.
yeah. So this was one of the first like full moon features movies where I was like, okay, I really, really like this. Cause then in thinking about it, it's like, oh, I'm aware of the Ginger Dead Man. I'm aware of Evil Bong. I'm aware of these other properties that I don't know they're necessarily my cup of tea, but like this is the type of full moon feature that I could get behind, was how my feeling in 2010. And then I remember being really happy when it was chosen for the revival of The Last Drive-In. And when Joe Bob had Charles Band on last, this is much more recent now. I mean, this was
Hmm.
probably only 4 years ago, 5 years ago at the most, had Charles Band on for the Head of the Family episode. And I love that the movie was being highlighted. I loved listening to Charles Band be interviewed about it because it fell kind of perfectly in that time where I read it came from the video aisle. My interest in Charles Band was peaked now at that point. And then, that predated the release of his autobiography by a little bit.
Hmm.
And that's kind of what got really all the wheels turning for what would then turn into the mission statement for this show.
Yeah.
So that, it's a very important full moon feature for you, it seems like, for your um, introduction really into the company and for your relationship with Charles Band and his stuff moving forward. And
Yeah. Yeah.
for me, it was too. It wasn't the first one I saw necessarily, but it was definitely one that impacted me early where I went, okay, this is a movie that is unlike a lot of movies I've seen in a lot of different ways. And it kind of endeared itself to me. And maybe in the beginning, I saw it a little bit as a guilty pleasure too. Maybe,
Yeah.
I'm sort of rewriting history and saying that I was totally on board non-ironically from the first viewing. And maybe that wasn't 100% the case, but I definitely went back and watched it a handful of times and definitely started to have I would say, very sincere respect and enjoyment of that movie. And I wasn't watching it ironically anymore. And then it became
No.
one that me and my buddy we would talk about it very positively, sincerely. And then once I, started to branch out and meet other horror creatives, it is one that people generally view as this is a time where all of those swings that they took worked.
Absolutely. Now, the roots of this story, so there
Hmm.
we've covered in the past that Charles Band was briefly kind of flirting with a partnership with comic book legend Jack Kirby, who we mentioned earlier, you know, from he of Marvel Comics and DC, and just kind of like indisputably the best comic book artist of all time. At least, I don't know, and for my money, in terms of like what you think of as comic book art, it comes from Jack Kirby. But he had been kind of collaborating with Kirby on a couple of projects that we covered in the past. I think Invisible kind of started as one of those, or and Dr. Mordred was like kind of a little bit of that. There were a few movies that were sort of going to come around from this, and it never really materialized. And the movies that were released were very, very different from what was being discussed with Kirby. And this movie was not really part of that, but there is a very direct connection because Jack Kirby, I believe in the 70s, he wrote for an anthology series for DC called Black Magic. And it was kind of like their own stab at like a Tales from the Crypt or like an EC horror kind of thing. Yeah. And there was an issue that was just called The Head of the Family. And it featured a massively deformed little guy with a gigantic head who lived in a wheelchair and psychically controlled his kind of inbred family, you know? So there's a very clear parallel between that story, and not just in the fact that they're the exact same title, but like there's a very similar premise. They diverge significantly after that, and Charles Band definitely puts his own unique spin on it, but this is clearly an homage, and we know that Band is like a massive comic book guy, like going way, way back. So this is definitely an homage to that. So this movie was shot in early 1996, and it's one of the like few movies at this time that was getting a real like full court press like promotional push, because you know, obviously a lot of the Paramount money had dried up after that deal ended, and the Kushner-Locke was not quite as flush as Paramount was. And so their advertising budget, they had to kind of pick and choose. And I think making this movie, they realized that they had something. I don't know if they knew what they had, but it was clear that they had something. We talked recently, it's actually going to be in an upcoming episode, kind of, so a bit of a spoiler. We talk a little bit about the Arkoff system, right? Which was an acronym that Samuel Arkoff came up with. He is the co-founder of American International Pictures with Roger Corman. He uses his name as an acrostic for explaining how to make a successful movie, you know? And this one kind of checks off all of those markers. Like it's, let me find the exact acronym. It's so A, action, things need to move. I think that happens here, you know, even if a lot of it is dialogue. R, revolution, there's something controversial, something spicy, some kind of hot take. Yeah, this has got that. Killing, yeah, there's death and violence, absolutely. Oratory, memorable dialogue, oh, very much so. Fantasy, showing the audience something that they want. That kind of feeds into the film noir, which always has a bit of like a forbidden fruit kind of element to it. And fornication, which means sex appeal. And this is hitting the entire Arkoff chart, right down the line. And it's clear that like something in this was working. And I think this has become, in retrospect, like one of the big movies of the Full Moon canon, but it took a while for it to grow. I think video stores were in a bit of a transitional period. They're going from like VHS to DVDs. And they don't have as strong of a relationship with like the blockbusters of the world as they used to when they were working under Paramount. So it's a little harder to get some of these movies found, but over the years, this has become like one of the flagship movies. And now we can officially say we have covered every movie on the cover of Dave J's book, It Came From the Video Aisle. We have covered every one of them. So the display here for people who haven't seen that book, we have the ape from Primevals, we have Blade from Puppet Master, we have Radu from Subspecies, Killjoy from the Killjoy movies, and Jack Death from Trancers. And seated at the back, presiding over the entire thing, is Mr. Myron Stackpoole. Now, a little bit about that actor. So Myron Stackpoole here is played by a guy named J.W. Para, and I was really not able to find much about him at all. He's kind of a big question mark. And if we ever have people involved in the making of this movie on the show, I'd really like to learn more about him. His entire acting career was constrained entirely to Full Moon features. He was in 4 of them. This is the first one. He was also in The Creeps, which we've covered, and he was just playing like a video store patron. He's a Mystery Monsters, and he's in Kra, the Sea Monster, which is from the kaiju movies that we haven't covered yet. Yeah. He has no online presence other than the credits for this movie. And so I'm really curious about who this guy is, because this is a really memorable turn and a really strange performance, a really strange committed performance that I really like. The rest of the cast, we've talked about Blake Adams in the past, aka Blake Bailey. I forget which one he's credited as in this one, but
He's Blake Bailey in this one.
he's Blake Bailey in this one. So Blake Adams is what he goes by now. This is his second full moon feature following the 1994 Lovecraft adaptation Lurking Fear, which we covered, and I think we both kind of like, soft recommended. And he would later appear in one more film for this company, Killer Eye, opposite his co-star from this film, Jackie Lavelle, who we'll talk about in a second. Still steadily working TV actor to this day, mostly like one-off TV episodes and video game voice acting, but he's very much still going today. Looks like he had an arc on Justified, which fits. I think his type really well on Unjustified. For the rest of the cast here, we have Alexandria Quinn, who plays Ernestina. She is a former adult actress who kind of got into a Tracy Lords kind of scandal because allegedly she used a fake ID to break into the porn industry when she was only 17 years old. And as a result, a lot of her early work has just completely gone, rightfully so. Like most porn companies would not work with her after this. She had a bit of a comeback in the early 2000s, but it seems like she's been retired since 2012. Also retired is Bob Schott, who plays the hulking. He is a stuntman and a former arm wrestling champion. And he appeared in a lot of like thug and heavy roles in movies like In the Line of Fire, Out for Blood, Gymkata, Head of the Family.
I was going to say, you can't give this guy's filmography and not talk about Gymkata.
Oh, I got to talk about Gymkata.
Is that the first time we've said the word Gymkata on this show?
It's the first 4 times we said the word Gymkata. Yeah, yeah.
Oh man, talk about a guilty pleasure.
That's a ton of fun. If you're ever having a good bad movie night, Gymkata is a banger. I mean, you just gotta love any movie. Like it is. I'm gonna say maybe the premier gymnastics based kung fu martial arts movie of its time.
It is, and it takes place in the fictional country of Parmistan, which is hilarious.
Where pommel horses sprout like weeds, apparently. And so Head of the Family is his last film. He directed a short documentary about supernatural occurrences in 1998, and since then he's been making a living as a photographer. You can look up some of his stuff. He's pretty good. And James Jones, who plays the blind Wheeler, he's also long retired. Only 5 minor roles in films, nothing since 2008. Of course, the main event here is our personal favorite, Miss Jacqueline Lavelle, making her full moon debut, or full moon proper debut, I should say.
Can you imagine? I mean, talk about a serendipitous meeting, right? Like she goes in, she's in, does like a Torchlight, like Surrender Cinema movie.
Yeah.
And then based solely on her look and her energy is asked to come and audition for Head of the Family and gives this performance. Like, I don't think you would expect, like, you might see her in the other movie and think this girl has a look and I want to utilize her again. And I have this kind of like sex pot for Head of the Family, maybe. But I think there had to be a question as to how she could really carry the comedy of the role. And it's like, what an unbelievably fortuitous thing to then have her come and audition for this role. Because again, hindsight is 2020, but I can't imagine, out of all of the different actors that we've seen come through all of these different movies, I can't imagine anyone else playing this role. Like the Loretta role is just, it's Jackie Lavelle, and she is just, because her comic energy is so different.
It's very different, yeah. But that's always been kind of her secret superpower, and it's kind of what sets her apart from a lot of the other like full moon leading ladies that we've covered on this series. Because, like, look, we've both been horny on main for Jackie Lavelle in the past. She's obviously stunning, really gorgeous woman. But her secret power is that she's always fully possesses herself. Like there is not a smidgen of self-doubt or of self-consciousness in any of the performances she gives. B, she's game as hell. She's up for anything. She has like no qualms about like doing whatever she needs. And C, she's funny. She's really, really funny in a genuine way. And she understands what movie she's making. She understands her own limitations as an actress. She understands kind of like why she's here and what she's meant to do, and she fits it exactly. And I think there's a quality to her that I always appreciated, which is that sometimes you'll see actresses in movies like this and you'll feel kind of squicky because you feel like they're being exploited. You feel like they've got a deer in the headlights kind of quality to them that makes you feel bad, like maybe they were tricked or maybe they got in over their head. Jackie Lavelle never feels like that. She
No,
fully
this
feels like
is
she is 1,000% in on the joke.
yeah.
She is she's got a knowingness and kind of like a quickness to her that is really endearing. And I think it works really well here, playing what is essentially like a femme fatale character.
Hmm.
She is the one, you know, like in any good film noir, there's got to be like one female character who everybody writes off who is actually secretly smarter than everybody else in the movie.
Yeah.
While the men in this are having their like pissing contests about who's smarter, she's secretly like coming out on top every single time.
No, this is an exploitation movie in the gnarliest, kind of grandest sense. But one thing not being exploited in this movie is Jackie Lavelle.
No, no,
Like,
not at all.
but you're absolutely right. It's like she is, she's Lana Turner, she's Barbara Stanwyck,
Yeah.
she is Jane Greer, she's Linda Darnell. But in this really bizarre kind of way, like it's that character, but for the 90s. And it's just I'm kind of having a tough time even just coming up with descriptors for it, because she is a femme fatale, but I feel like there's a femme fatale quality to her, which I will say is one of the reasons why. Now we'll get into 5 other full moon noir movies in the
Mm-hmm.
month of November. So we'll talk, as we do with those, about the noir treatment, what works, what doesn't, which ones have the tropes of noirs, which ones don't necessarily. But for this, it's like she has some of those qualities, but it's a little bit different because she feels like is I feel like she is genuinely sort of in love with Lance. At
Yeah.
least early on, doesn't seem like when I think of like Walter Neff, Fred McMurray in Double
Right.
Indemnity, he's kind of a sucker from minute one in that movie. Whereas I don't necessarily feel like Loretta is trying to double cross Lance initially, although she does show as the movie goes. It's more like he, lets her down and she then decides, fuck this guy. Like,
That's kind of yeah, she gets to kind of fill both roles, right? She is the femme fatale, and she is kind of the giddy sex pot who is kind of like quietly pulling all the strings. But you also do kind of feel bad that she gets kind of screwed over, because Lance, in the classic film noir tradition, is a dum-dum who
yes.
thinks he's not. That's every single film noir main character is a dum-dum who talks real slick and thinks he has a handle on the situation, but never actually does. And that's him very explicitly in this movie. And as he keeps getting like bigger and bigger in his britches and like squaring off against the Stackpools and things like that, he starts to throw her under the bus as like part of his like wheeler dealer sort of new attitude, so you do
Right.
feel bad for her, like she's getting burned at the stake because he's being too much of an idiot, and like he cheats on her and is just kind of like, whatever, she has sexual powers, I don't know, what do you want me to do, like, which is
Hey, that's a
probably
half truth.
probably not a valid excuse for all of you cheaters out there. Probably not a valid excuse. Just saying, like, oh,
No,
she had
certainly not.
strange sexual powers. Yeah, no, that probably doesn't fly in real life.
No. I would say I don't know, from experience having ever used that excuse, but I will say it does not sound like a valid one that holds up. But
No.
I do think with this movie, one of the things it has these small noirish elements, and then it also has kind of a Tim Burton, like Frankenweenie kind of feeling to it, about like this, like monsters being sort of like you know put together and brought back by electrocution, or these otherworldly elements. And it also has, like we said, the EC Comics feel. So what I think this movie benefits from, in its black and white presentation, which I watched for this recording
Mm-hmm.
because I've seen the movie a number of times. So I didn't really feel like I had to watch it in color, but I did say, for this, and it's funny, when we started this podcast, which is, a little over 2.5 years ago, I remember thinking like, well, we'll have to save some of the big ones like Head of the Family and stuff for a little bit down the line. So I haven't watched this movie in, I'm going to say, probably about 3 to 4 years.
Since before we started the show. Yeah, it's been since we started the show, at least, like since
Yeah.
before then.
And I said, so for watching it in preparation for this show, I'm going to watch the noir presentation of it.
Mhm.
And there are a few scenes where I think this movie benefits in some ways from the black and white treatment, because the forced perspective totally reminds me of like killer insect movies and stuff like that from the 50s. Just a really nice kind of period appropriate sleight of hand that they use in this movie, as opposed to a lot of practicality, which I think are practical, like latex or rubber effects or things like that, which I think is one of the things that works in its favor. It also has a really nicely staged, very noirish scene, which is the scene where Lance and Loretta are in the car and they're planning how they're going to get rid of Howard. Like that scene to me, like played like a scene from Double Indemnity, or from a noir where they spend a lot of time in a car, Gun Crazy,
Mhm.
or some of those ones. And I thought, not only is this a very noirish scene thematically, but it also looked really good in black and white. And it just, the shadows and the lighting on the two of them worked really well in black and white. And then when it gets to the scenes when they're in the Stackpoole's house,
Mhm.
it feels more like almost, I don't want to say this because I don't mean it in terms of the competency in which the movie's made, but like an Ed Wood type monster movie, or Burt I. Gordon type monster movie.
Yeah, yeah. Which, like, I think we're burying the lead a little bit on this one, because we're talking about all the noirish elements of this movie and kind of completely negating the fact that the whole freak show element of this film, which is,
Of course.
this is about a heavily mutated family of inbred weirdos that live in the small town. They are all psychically controlled by their hyper genius older brother Myron, who has a gigantic head and tiny little limbs. He's stuck in a wheelchair all the time, and he's got the great touch of like having like the little struts kind of holding up his head, so it won't tip over. They're all mutated, and he's got these 3 siblings that he just kind of controls. They always walk in lockstep. Wheeler has like perfect sight and hearing, and can like spy on people. Otis is super strong, and Alexandria, like we mentioned, has the power of total seduction, which she really doesn't employ much in this movie, but she also kind of doesn't really have to, because the other insane, very full moony kind of touch to this movie is that I would say fully half of the exposition in this movie takes place in the middle of sex scenes. Like,
Yes.
there are at least 5 scenes in which characters are having long discursive dialogue while like humping each other in a back room.
Yeah, they're really cashing in on that final F of the Arkoff system for this movie here. But I will say, you mentioned Alexandria, as in Alexandria Quinn. Suffice to say,
Ernestina, I mean,
the character's name of Ernestina is such a funny character.
That's
name.
such a funny name.
I
for
heard
like a
you
sex
say
bot.
it,
Yeah.
and I didn't want to interrupt you mid-sentence to correct you on it, but
No.
you said it, and in my head I was like, oh no, it's Ernestina. Like Ernestina, the vamp sex pod is so great, like such a silly name. But you're absolutely right. I think that's one of the choices this movie makes that is so bold and so funny, is to having the characters just, work out the kinks of their plan and scheme while mid-coitus is so, it's just one of those things. Like, this is a movie that's one of those touches where you show this movie to the uninitiated, and you're just going to see kind of like mouths open of people, just that this is the way they're deciding to do this, and it's great, and it just works so well.
It's one of those movies, like, yeah, if you do have it for a bad movie night, you just need to be sure like your crowd is prepped, because I've had events like that go south when like too much nudity, or like we put on The Room once, and then like, which fits the bill for that so perfectly.
Of
but
course.
Like, watching Tommy Wiseau's like weirdly muscular ass and like thrusting into a belly button is like, a little jarring for some people, especially when it happens 3 times in a row. So yeah, just be forewarned about that if you are having like a get together with this movie, which I recommend because this is a rowdy movie. But this is a very horny movie, and there's a lot of that kind of stuff going on. But
Well,
it's also
Tommy
like,
Wiseau is allowed to do what he wants to Juliet Daniel because she's his future wife.
of course, and obviously he's the emperor of Mars or wherever the fuck he's from, so like he can do what he wants. He gets diplomatic
Right.
immunity.
He's the flower shop attendant's favorite customer.
And does that not mean something in this crazy twisted up world of ours? Yeah, so I mean that's just kind of this element of it. And I think the other big part of this movie that I think will surprise a lot of people is that this is essentially, like a lot of Charles Band movies, this is essentially a filmed play. This is very dialogue heavy. It all is rooted in this kind of like Tennessee Williams level of like melodrama, where it's a lot of like, especially it feels especially pronounced in this movie because it takes place in like anonymous southern small town where like everybody seems to have an entirely different accent, but it's fine. This has this kind of like Southern Gothic sort of twist on it, but lots and lots and lots of dialogue and like pretty witty dialogue for the most part. Some of it's like really tortured, but like it's tortured in a really intentional soap opera-ish way that is really funny, especially when you consider like the mouths it's coming out of, like it's so much dialogue is coming from J.W. Para as Myron, and he is just this kind of like big crazy looking mutant, and it's so there's such a wonderful dissonance to this movie, like just kind of defying your expectations at every point.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm 100% in agreement about that. And I think the Southern Gothic aspect of it is funny. I think Blake Bailey's line deliveries is very funny. And I mean, Jacqueline Lavelle is doing, they're saying he calls her Scarlett in the movie. She's doing like a Scarlett O'Hara.
She's totally doing like a Vivian Leigh, which is like really wrong for where, like, I don't know. I'm just the letting the Texas influence me, but I was reading this as like rural Texas. I was reading this as like a really small, like maybe like a East Texas town, like a Joe Lansdale kind of town or something like that, and but everybody's kind of like it's a bring your own accent kind of movie, it's do whatever you can. And sometimes those accents kind of like bump up against the wall, and sometimes they're pretty convincing. I think the actor who plays Howard, like the abusive biker boyfriend, I thought he was quite good. I thought he was very funny in it. His name is I have it right here, Gordon Jemison Noyce, who Noyce, yeah. Yes. I think he was really funny, and like
agreed.
And I think Vicky Skinner as Susie, the diner owner or the diner like waitress, is like really kind of on point and understands the assignment. Like there's a really good kind of deep bench here.
Well, and I think there's just some lines of dialogue. Like there's a line that Lance says where he's talking about the Stackpoole house, and he's like, they got like oil, gas, coal, all that flammable shit.
All that like, flammable shit.
What an interesting, because he's talking about how rich they are. And I just thought like, that is such a bizarre line of dialogue, but fits 100% for this character somehow. Like it just works because it's like everyone is so pointedly. I think one of the things I also love about this movie is the design of the people.
Yeah.
Like every character in this movie looks very different and very purposeful. Like I think when you're dealing with like these low budget movies, a lot of times you have maybe character types or secondary or tertiary characters who kind of blend together. That does not happen here. Like every single person is immediately identifiable. Like Ernestina, Otis, and Wheeler, from their look to how they walk to their facial expressions, like are totally different from one another and all completely unique in their design. I think Loretta obviously is, she's a classically beautiful blonde woman, but she has a very distinct look. I think Lance, has a very specific, like you said, he had an arc on Justified. He's got this like kind of
like the strung out cowboy kind of look.
Strung out
like
cowboy. I couldn't have said it better myself.
Yeah,
I was looking for a descriptor there and you beat me to it. He's got the strung out cowboy look, But like, yeah, the look of Howard, I mean, he's just basically predates Dog the Bounty Hunter.
Oh
Like,
man, I think he looks a lot like Greg Nicotero.
yes,
I don't
that
know if
too.
that's intentional or not, but yeah, he really is kind of like adopting that whole long-haired kind of biker look. Or who's the guy who Kurt Sutter, who created Sons of Anarchy? Kind of
Oh
looks
yeah,
he's got
yeah.
that kind of like long-haired biker dude sort of vibe. Yeah, but no, you're exactly right. Like Jacqueline Lavelle is like obviously, yeah, like we said, she's a stunner, but she also looks like somebody who you would realistically see in real life. Like she is not like movie star gorgeous. She is just like human being gorgeous. And so like not all like hyper inflated and like, but the brilliant thing about her character and her performance is that like the whole fully like the last 40 minutes of this movie is just kind of this like extended standoff between Myron and Lance, who is like has to deliver so much dialogue upside down strapped to a
Yes.
table. Good on him. Like that must have been a long day. But the fun part about this is that like while they're squabbling and while they're like constantly trying to like one up each other, she's using exactly like she's using her survival skills, right? Which is like she's known her entire life how to use her looks and how to use her body to kind of get out of these situations. So while they're all squabbling and fighting, she's flirting with Otis and kind of buying herself a little escape route, and then
Mhm.
it's the fun kind of twist at the end of the movie is that the idea that she might not be totally out from under the influence of Myron in the end, and she might not have been outsmarted ultimately, because that's kind of something that you could ding this movie for, is that a lot of the time Myron is just getting like his clock cleaned by like this kind of like local dumbass who seems to have like been outthinking him at every step. And you could argue that he's just like underestimating him, and
Mhm.
or you could argue that he's playing a long game. And I think the final reveal of the movie shows that he's playing the long game.
Yeah. No, I would 100% agree with that. I think it's important that they cut back to Loretta kind of getting her one-uppance from Otis. I think there's a world in which with Loretta saying, I'm going to take care of you, Otis, and then like it cutting to black, and
Mm-hmm.
we as the viewer are like, oh well, now she is going to inherit the Stackpoole fortune. She'll eventually like slowly poison Otis or something like that. But then
Yeah.
when it cuts to the actual scene of the wedding, which I think I'm glad that scene's there because I do think
Mm-hmm.
it's pretty funny, and you get the sort of little reverse twist, although it's not like a crazy plot twist or anything, but it is a little, but it does then, kind of turn the tables back on Loretta, which I think is maybe part of Myron's long game there. But
Yeah.
it's, I think both of those scenes are fun to include. And I think you could have played it where they cut to black that first time and went directly to credits instead of them going then to the ceremony, which they do. But I think there are a lot of, like you said, if you want to ding this movie for something, I mean, this is a movie where if you go by the plot of the film, it's not an incredibly complicated plot. There's a lot of dialogue, there's a lot of exposition, but there's not a lot of actual plot in the sense of, you know, uh, a story mountain really goes. It's like
It's
there's some rising
ultimately
action
really
introducing. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
oh yeah, it's ultimately really not that dissimilar from the Coen brothers movie Blood Simple. Like
No, it's not.
truly, it's kind of the same plot of the movie Blood Simple.
Sure. And like the movie Blood Simple, I am so on board with the world this movie has introduced to me to
Yeah.
that I'm okay with it being a threadbare plot. Like I'm okay with it not, one of the things about like noirs is like the sometimes convoluted nature of the amount of double crosses and triple crosses and things that take place in those movies. And I mean, and I love the writing of Raymond Chandler and Dashiell Hammett
Mm-hmm.
and James M. Cain and people like that. But I mean, I find that to be entertaining. But yeah, sometimes when you get to something like, let's say, The Big Sleep, it's convoluted to the point where it's almost incomprehensible from a narrative perspective.
Yeah.
This is much more simplistic, but that's okay. I don't want to ding the movie for that because the movie goes, it takes these diversions away from the narrative plot to some of these scenes where these characters are just existing within this world that's been created for us. And I am 100% cool with that in this
Yeah,
movie.
yeah, absolutely. There's just a great kind of vibe to this movie. And yeah, you don't need to get too into it. And the dialogue does cover kind of a lot of ground in this movie, but it's all color, it's all, everybody talks in a very exaggerated way. Like Myron Stackpoole is just very much doing like a Hammer horror, like kind of
Yes.
welcome to my den of evil. Allow me to give you some wine while I discuss my evil plan. It's a lot of stuff like that. And then Lance and Loretta just have all these like, goofy kind of East Texas sort of like dialogue twinges, which is not like really how anybody actually talks in real life, but it's how they talk in like Jim Thompson novels or,
Hmm.
things that like this movie is clearly drawing from. And I just think the fact that we can like draw lines to these different influences with this movie is a testament to kind of like its overall quality. I think it is like a writerly movie. I think it is kind of a thoughtful movie. And yeah, obviously it's very silly in a lot of ways and it's very overblown and it's like intentionally gross and shocking and like weird, but there's something here that is just kind of, you have to kind of, it's hard to put your finger on. And like I've gone on the full journey of like appreciating it ironically to kind of wholeheartedly just sort of embracing this movie. It's like, yeah, I think this movie is entirely successful at what it's trying to do.
Absolutely.
And it's really ambitious for a full moon film, especially of this time. It's coming at like right at the right time where the fucks have been gone, the fucks are out the window, the money's out the window, but the ambition is still there. And you could really see it in this movie.
Totally. And I think we talked about all of the things that Charles Band loves, like tiny terrors or like some kind of bizarre, crazy mutant type thing. And, you know, movies. Like he loves movies. And so there are just not just noir, but tropes of noir, but also tropes of, like we said, there's throwbacks and callbacks to things that are indicative of Hammer horror. There's Universal monster stuff. I didn't really talk. I mentioned before about how I felt like in black and white, it had sort of a very Tim Burton-esque feel to it.
Yeah.
But even the Richard Band main theme of the movie is very influenced by Danny Elfman in kind
It's
of the
very
best
like,
ways.
and there, yeah, it's a really fun score because it's very propulsive in that way and like very gothic and goofy, but it's also got like bells and whistles and like clown horns and things like that on it. Like it's a very strange track, but really, really good. And it suits the tone of the movie entirely. Like, because the movie is
Hmm.
a little creepy, a little sly, a little silly, a little sexy. Like it's
Yeah.
kind of going for all of these, and I think it really kind of nails it.
It does. And Richard Band composed that main theme. We should give credit to Steve Morell, who is the
Mm-hmm.
person who composed all of the underscore
A
and
credit I don't think
scored.
I've ever seen before. Underscore by. Like I don't think I've ever seen that credit before.
Yeah, I feel like Richard Band probably contributed the main theme and maybe some recurring motifs, and then the rest of the movie was scored by someone else who did a really good job matching. I feel like the energy of
Mm-hmm.
that main theme and matching the tone of the movie. I want to put a pin in the conversation at this point for a second and come back to a point I wanted to make, but before I forget it, I want to just say, we talked a little bit about how this movie is largely forced perspective, which I find to be a really endearing quality of it. But,
Yeah.
there is obviously one very memorable practical effect in the movie, which would be that gross, slimy, bumpy Myron Stackpoole tongue.
Right. Yeah. Which is put to rather memorable use in a scene that I felt like kind of evoked like a Reanimator or
Yep,
something
I
like
was
that.
gonna say, like, if you show an uninitiated person Reanimator for the first time and you get to the Dr. Hill severed head scene, they might have a similar reaction to how someone would watching Head of the Family with this scene here. And I think maybe because you're not inundated with latex and rubber and goopy monsters to that point in the movie, it's all the more effective because it
Mm-hmm.
really is one of the only practical effects of the movie in that way, other than Wheeler's eyeballs, which are just a like such a fun, again, not to beat a dead horse, but I could totally see like a Burton character, almost like some of the, not the sandworms, but kind of some of the stop motion Beetlejuice stuff, characters kind of having these bulging eyeballs like that. But I think that makes the tongue all the more effective in that scene.
Yeah.
But I want to go back to what we were saying before about how we're drawing from all of these different elements, which are then showing how this movie is really purposefully doing something. I think that this movie is the perfect example of what Charles Band would continue to try to do in a lot of these Kushner Lock movies. Probably the second most effective or successful one would be Blood Dolls.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
then I think if you look at what followed this being both like The Creeps and Hideous,
Both really
I
fun
think,
97 movies. Yeah. Yeah.
right. But I think those movies, there are issues maybe with scenes that are maybe dialogue heavy that aren't as quirky and memorable as this one. So I feel like they're trying to do the same thing in those movies. And while we thought those movies were pretty successful, I would say The Creeps is successful because it has, the great Phil Fondacaro Dracula performance.
Yes.
But I love, the invoking of the universal monsters. I think that's what
Yeah.
that movie does best. And then I think Hideous works in a lot of ways because it has Jackie Lavelle in these batshit memorable scenes. But this is the one where I think drawing all of those influences in and coming up with something that's so off kilter, so off the wall, so singularly kind of uniquely full moon, and like the representation of what Charles Band wants in one of his movies on screen is where it's sort of at its best here.
Yeah.
Like this is the one where they all come together.
I think
This is the
so.
one where all the elements marry in a way. And I agree with you. I think, if you go and you look at the IMDb rating of this movie, it's lower than I feel like it should be. It's
It's in the
got a,
fours, right?
it's
Yeah.
5.3,
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
which I think is low because I think this is the type of movie that people are then jumping onto the internet to kind of rate and review, and they don't get it. Like this movie's not for everyone. And I think if you get what they're going for, I think they're wholly successful in what they're going for. And I'm not saying you, as a discernible movie viewer, have to be on board for what they're doing. But I think if you're then going to take to IMDb or take to Letterboxd or these things, at least recognize like the intentionality behind the filmmaking here. And I think those scores are all lower. I think if you look at IMDb reviews, you get a mix of people who get it and then people who are just like, I also think this movie sort of this movie draws out an issue I have with like movie reviewing of the masses as a whole,
Like
which
the
is that
binary of like a good movie to bad movie.
yes, I well put. I think this movie highlights for me that there are a lot of people, not our listeners, not the Full Moon Features fan base. There are a lot of people who cannot discern between an identifiably cheap movie and a bad movie. I think there is a movie going audience who initially kind of they tie anything that is recognizably low budget with something that's like without merit or
Yeah.
something that is solely existing as this shitty bastardized version of something that somebody would want to make on a big budget. I don't think they see the appeal of what you can do, with a low budget studio like Full Moon with this type of movie. And I think because of that, a lot of the reviews, like you see a lot of ones and twos or ones to fours of people being like, what the hell is this movie? This movie, these are no name actors. This movie looks like it cost nothing to make. Yeah,
Right.
it's a
Yeah. It
low
was.
budget movie. Like that's, but that's there you can make we've encountered it numerous times on this show. You can make something that is totally worthwhile and totally successful, as a B movie, and then sometimes those transcend B movies even into being just in the conversation of good movies. And I genuinely feel like if you take into account the movie they wanted to make here and the movie that they made, yes, you could watch this first, and while you're first taking it all in, be sort of like, what the fuck was that I just watched? And
Yeah.
you could think, I got some ironic enjoyment out of watching something. But I think taking all that into account, by my second, third, fourth, fifth, probably time watching this movie,
Yeah.
I'm no longer in the camp of like, oh, this is a bad movie, but it's a bad movie that you could watch with friends, like you were saying for your introduction, to where this is just a good B movie that knows what it's doing. And it's, again, you're always going to be a little hindered by the limitations that you have. And so maybe it has aspirations that it can't quite reach in some of the areas. But in
Yeah.
any way that I think is important, I think it does. And so I find this to be on that list of times when, like, Full Moon and Charles Band as a director and Neil Marshall Stevens as a writer were able to put something together. If Reanimator transcended, the exploitation basement market,
Yeah.
this transcends the weird hybrid kind of gross body horror, grade Z market that the movies were maybe being advertised as
Yeah.
being in.
Yeah. No, I'm with you. Like, yeah, I think something that we've just kind of learned from doing this show, and we've repeated it before, but I think we've just kind of learned to meet a movie at their level and to not just automatically assume that every movie is aspiring to be like a $250 million blockbuster, like or like an Oscar winner or anything like that. Like, not every movie is really going for that vibe. This movie has a vibe that it's going for. It sticks with it, and I think it really sticks the landing. It's definitely one of my favorite full
Mm-hmm.
moon movies. Maybe my favorite full moon proper movie outside of like the Empire. Uh, yeah, I think it's pretty far up there for me.
Yeah, I 100% agree. And I think it has the charm and the intentional nod to things like a Burt I. Gordon or Ed Wood movie,
Yeah.
more obviously much more competently made than those ones were. I think it has the use of some noir elements in ways that really work. So obviously it's hearkening to that genre and pulling tropes of that genre, but like throwing them into this weird, funky blender. I
Mm-hmm.
think like it also just has, you know, very successful in a lot of ways, very intentional black comedy
Yeah.
that
Yeah, I
works
think
in the
so.
in the movie. And I think because of that, it lands really highly for me. I think it is a movie. It's obviously a movie that Charles Band loves. He talks about, in the introduction to the noir version, about how this one he felt like had a lot of natural noir elements to it, and that it would be a perfect one to present in black and white. I agree with him. I think it works. I think it works in color. And I also think it works in black and white. I think you
Absolutely.
can, if you watched it for the first time in its noir presentation, I don't think you necessarily miss anything. I think if you watch it for the first time in its regular color, I don't know that there's anything integral you're not getting from the viewing. I think it's kind of dealer's choice with how
Yeah.
you want to consume the movie. But I think this is one that is just, I think, a fan favorite as well. When you talk to when you think about what it is that people love about Full Moon Features, and the fan base of Full Moon Features is a rabid fan base. It's a loyal fan base. I think this movie checks, besides checking all the Arkoff boxes, it also checks all of the Full Moon Feature fans boxes. And it gave us Jackie Lavelle in roles that weren't relegated just to Surrender or Torchlight Cinema, and for that I'm forever grateful.
Absolutely.
And it's just a delight. It's a delight. Like, I watched it today for the recording in the noir presentation, and even though I know the heavy hitters of the lines of dialogue, I'm still chuckling to myself watching it, and I'm just thinking about how audacious some of the choices are. And
Yeah.
it's 82 minutes. It's breezy. It flies by. It doesn't have a soggy middle. It's just it's got everything that a Full Moon fan could want. So, when we eventually revisit our rankings again, with Puppet Master 3 and Subspecies 2 and some of those, I mean, this definitely finds itself in, especially if we're talking Full Moon proper, like you said, probably in my top
Yeah,
three.
definitely. And for people who are getting ready to write angry letters, we have not really mentioned Bride of the Head of the Family much, but
Yes, good
that's
point.
because this is a movie that has been teased and kind of like announced and then canceled and like brought back and canceled over and over again.
Yeah.
I have not given up hope that this is happening. I think it is still
Yes.
happening. Like as recently as like 2020, it was announced. So I think it's going to exist in some form, and so I'm holding off on talking about that until we have a full proper episode. If nothing else, we'll do a bonus episode talking about the comic book adaptation that they made from the alleged like first screenplay of Bride of Head of the Family. But this has been in the works for a long time. But I'm gonna hold out hope that it's gonna happen and then it's gonna be good. But yeah, in the meantime, I think this is an exciting way to end spooky season and to kick off Noirvember, which is going to be a lot of fun. Jared, where can people find our show if they want to hear more? Well, they know about that, but if they want to interact with us, I guess.
Yeah. Well, you know what? This might be someone's first episode, like, casting out the net, putting a Head of the Family episode out there. Like someone could have been searching for a Head of the Family podcast, and someone may be listening for the first time. So if you are, welcome. We hope that you enjoyed this episode of our show.
What's up,
if
you
you're
weirdo?
Yeah, for real. Said the quiet part loud.
Damn
if you're somebody who's been listening, since day one or been keeping up with us week to week with these shows, we're really appreciative. We would love it if you would be so kind as to go onto your podcast catcher. If it has a rate and review function, drop us a 5-star rating, maybe a brief review if you feel so inclined to do so. We're talking about Bride of Head of the Family as something that's potentially out there in the future. It would be wonderful, for this show to still be going on when the Bride of the Family eventually does happen. And just, getting the word out there is just a way to help ensure that this show reaches a larger audience, finds an even bigger fan base, and just continues to go and continues to grow. If you want to keep up with what we're doing, episode to episode, the best way to do that is on Instagram by following the show at puppetmasters_castle freaks. You can also follow me at _giallo_Jared. I know I have cut down a bit on personal posting, but I will still sort of be there in some capacity. I can't necessarily say the same for Facebook or Threads or Blue Sky.
Yeah.
So really just kind of go to Instagram. We recorded a couple of these episodes out of order, which, sometimes we do based on guest schedule and stuff like that. So if you hear me say in a future episode to go to Threads or Blue Sky, just know that we may not be as up to date with that information. But the episodes will still be on YouTube also in their audio format. Just, promoting a show's a lot, but consarn it, we're not the only show that Steve's going to take a moment to plug. Steve, what else have you got going on?
Consarn it, indeed. My other show is called Cinema Arcade. That's cinema and arcade mashed together. That's what we're doing. We're talking about movies and the video games that are based on those movies to see how they contrast, compare, and mix up. As of this episode, you will be hearing the very end of our spooky season, which is we're talking. I think as of today, we're talking about Halloween, which we really got to get on the books. I'm going to bug my co-hosts again so we can figure out a time to record that. But if all goes well, you will be hearing Jared on that episode talking about one of the 10 best movies ever made in history. Kind of indisputable masterpiece, but I'm excited to get into it. November is still a little bit of a mystery to me. I'm letting my co-host choose a couple movies. I can tell you that we're going to be watching The Dark Crystal, which is going to be an interesting one to revisit. This will be maybe my 5th time appearing on a podcast about The Dark Crystal, and that's a movie I don't even like that much. But I have to, it's fascinating and fun to talk about. So definitely check that out.
I was going to say, just go listen to our 80s in depth episode again.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's another one of them. But if you're already listening to podcasts, if you're in the neighborhood, you might as well check us out next week because our Noirvember is continuing. And this time we are talking about the movie Quadrant from 2024, one of the more recent movies that we've talked about, a very AI heavy thriller. But it is reuniting Charles Band with who I think is one of the best screenwriters for the entire Full Moon canon, C. Courtney Joyner, who did Puppet Master 3 and a lot of other different movies like that. So Pretty fun movie to talk about. So we will get into that next week with Quadrant.
Thank you again, listeners, for joining us to talk about Head of the Family, one of the indisputable classics of Full Moon. And we will see you for the entire month of Noir-vember.